Welcome to the Social Impactors Podcast. This podcast is all about impact. We work to highlight impactful individuals making positive social change in their communities. From coaches, authors, entrepreneurs, influencers, we tap into the minds of some of the most impactful people around the world to find out how they have built a life of creating impact. Now listen in and be ready to go on a journey of enlightenment, motivation, and awe. Social impact everywhere.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Social Impactors Podcast. And today I have another special guest. I have Thijs Mathot, and he's the founder and CEO of Brighter Investment. And Brighter Investment is an incredible company that actually invests in high-potential students for a portion of their future income. So, Thijs, I just wanted to first say thank you for taking the time today to be on the podcast with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to delve into this because this is from an investment lens, and it's something that is pretty close to my heart. So I really want to understand, and students is close to me too because I work in a post-secondary institution. So both those together, this is gonna be a cool story. The first question I have for you actually is just a little bit about you. So I want to understand who you are and why you believe you're a social impactor.
Yeah, the funny thing is so I'm Dutch originally, aerospace engineering, ended up working in industry, didn't really like it, got a business degree, applied for a job with a project developer in Mexico, of all places, got accepted. So I ended up working in Mexico for a period of my life. And while there, I became friends with a Mexican there, and this friend of mine didn't have enough money to send his younger brother to university despite having really high grades. So simply as a donation, we put some money together with some colleagues I had at the time, and we paid for his tuition fees. Not much money from our perspective. But I stayed in touch with the family through Facebook, also when I eventually moved back to the Netherlands, and realized the impact this money had on the student. The way it changed not only his life, but also the life of his family. And basically what I realized is I was working for this project developer, raising money, getting projects off the ground for a certain return on investment, obviously. And the money that we gave to this student had a way higher return on investment if you simply look at the financial numbers than these real estate projects we were working on. So this kind of started me thinking, supposedly we live in this market economy where resources flow to the areas where they create the most value. Clearly, that's not happening in this case. The value is there, but money isn't going there. And that started me thinking, like, why is that? And the simple answer is because there is no avenue for money to invest safely, with low risk, reliably in these students. And so that's the mission we have with Brighter Investment, is change that and provide that avenue and make sure that a capital flows from people who have it to the areas where it creates the most value, aka education.
So are you working then directly with these students? There's no intermediary. It really is, you go out and you find these students. What's the process then finding these students?
Yeah, so we're only operating in Ghana at the moment. So my business partner is Ghanaian. He's on the ground in Ghana. His job is to run the student program there. And what we do is we have developed a data-driven underwriting algorithm to pick students that are high potential. So high probability of doing well in university, high probability of doing well in the job market afterwards, and score high on honesty factor, so likelihood of repaying, basically. And the second thing we do is we only invest in degree programs that we know provide good career prospects. So there's a lot of engineering degrees, finance degrees, medicine, etc. And then we raise money from investors. That's my job in North America. We raise money from investors. We select these students that we believe are a good investment. We basically build a diversified portfolio of students. So instead of shares, it's a diversified portfolio of students, different industries, different regions, etc. We provide them with, we pay tuition fees to the university. We pay housing fees to either the university if they stay on campus or the hostel providers. And we pay them a monthly stipend. That allows them to get their degree, and once they graduate, they have to find a job, and then as soon as they have a job, they repay us a percentage of their income. So it's really not a student loan, but really an investment in their future potential. to give you an example, if you study civil engineering for 4 years in Ghana, you repay us 25% of your income for 6 years. And after those 6 years, you're debt free. That means that from like for a single student, it's quite hard to predict what we're going to earn because there is like quite a difference in what students earn after they graduate. But for us, because we invest in a large enough diversified portfolio of students, it's simple math based on average graduation, average dropout, average income, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes predictable what we'll make from our investment.
Wow.
And of course, to the student, the advantage is they never end up with a debt they can't repay. So yeah, that's basically the simple. We don't do much more than that at Brighter Investment. That's all we do.
Yeah.
And of course, then that has the effect that there's certain things like it provides us with an incentive to run a mentorship program, because the more successful the student is, the more successful we are. Mm. So it's worthwhile for us to invest in a mentorship program and help these students be more successful. So there's all these kind of like bringing market forces to the education space that helps. Like there's so many students also in North America that pursue degrees that in the end are not really going to help them with their career, which is a waste of the money invested, but mostly a waste of the time invested by the student. And so that way we hope that this model will not only help these students, but also in the future be an incentive for education providers to improve the job relevance of their programs.
Yeah, and I mean just the framework of what you're giving too. 6 years is not very long. I mean, if you think about that in the job market, and especially as an introduction to a specific industry, that flies by. And I mean, we have something called OSAP in Ontario, Canada, and it's a repayment system too. It's a loan for school, but it's long terms. It's like 10, 20 years, and some people don't pay it off for 30 years because it's very small amounts and it's a ridiculous interest rate. It really is, right? So 6 years is incredible what you're doing, and I mean the one thing that was a big flash for me, I was like, oh my God, is you're also paying a stipend, right? These students are able to focus in school while you're also helping them out.
Yeah, it's like, and that's the crazy thing. Like if you get a degree in North America, a good degree, your income goes up like maybe 1.5 times whichever degree. If you get a degree in Ghana, like what we see for our students, their income is 5 times as much as what it would have been without a degree. Wow. They're 6 times less likely to unemployed. And besides all the other advantages of more likely to have a pension, more likely to educate their children, et cetera, increase in tax revenue for the governments. But just if you look at simply those numbers, 5 times higher income, 6 times less likely to be unemployed. Yeah, like the return on investment is amazing. So yeah, pay us 25% of that income, and we make a very, very competitive return for our investors.
Wow. And I don't want you to, delve too much into this because this is the structure you've created, right? But what gave you this initial idea, or when did you decide that I was going to, pay a student's tuition, also pay them a stipend, and then, also making competitive advantage? Like that's an incredibly niche thing that you found.
Yeah. So there's actually, the funny thing is, Friedman, the economist who, or like when did he live? I don't know, like the 50s.
Yeah.
He actually proposed this income sharing model. So the idea isn't new. It's not ours. We can't take credit for it.
No, it's Friedman economics, right?
Yeah. So it's so we have basically taken a very old idea and implemented it. And then all the details of it, like, don't even get me started about the iterations and the failures and the mistakes we made and
that's normal.
We had to fix that. Like, so we've 220 students in our portfolio at the moment. We've also invested in some 3rd and 4th year students. So that means that the first students we've invested in that were at that point 3rd and 4th year students have now graduated and started repaying. So we can now show, like, this is the first year that we can show, like, hey, this actually works on a small scale. But there have been mistakes and failures and lessons along the way.
Yeah, that's normal. I mean, I've made my fair share of mistakes too in startup. So it's always fun learning.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to jump into the second question because it's we talked to you about Brighter Investment, but I want to learn about you now. And I want to learn about how you're making a positive impact in your community.
Like in my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
I must admit it's limited. basically my impact is through my work. I would before our call was talking about how I fly back and forth from West to East Canada every month. The impact of that isn't very positive.
Yeah, we can only do so much.
Yeah, I always try to I'm not a vegetarian. I do only eat meat that I know where it comes from and is ethically sourced. I find that very important. I live in a very small apartment, very low energy bill. I don't own a car, so all that helps. I cycle to work every day. That's an advantage of spending most of my time in Vancouver and not in the snow in Toronto where I'm now.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
But I think overall, I'm not leading a very impactful life in that way. It's very much my work, and that will have to speak for itself.
I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? When people talk about the impact they're making, it can be very personal, in a local community. But yours is an extended community, right? I just got back from hosting a workshop where we talked to students about the impact of change making, right, and the impact of what you create in the world. And a gentleman talked about a nonprofit he runs, and he's building schools, right? A very traditional framework of helping in poorer countries, but he's now been able to impact 1,000 students that is now trickled down into 50,000 potential more students and 50,000 opportunities, right? So he's scaled this nonprofit, and he's helped 50,000 people. And that's incredible, right? And he's helped people in countries where his money goes a little bit further, meaning that they get more opportunity, like you're saying, 5 times of an increase just having a degree in Ghana.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that speaks for itself. Maybe I'm biased because I think there's good people in the world, but I think that's good.
Yeah. But that's the multiplier effect from education. It's the 5 times income increases for the student, but also if you simply look at it, these students that we support are some of the smartest students that graduate high school with top of their class. And the unfortunate situation in most developing countries is no matter how talented you are, if you're from a poor family, there's very few scholarships, there is no bank loans, you're probably not able to finance higher education.
Yeah.
And so, but now we take these students and they get a degree and they imagine what things they are going to do in the rest of their life. They're going to be scientists, work, we have one of our students recently discovered a new cotton form that is, I don't even understand the full details. It's resistant to certain diseases, which is going to help farmers there grow more cotton,
Wow.
Another one is working as a medical scientist for malaria, helping malaria, prevent malaria and cure malaria. So the impact multiplier of getting these really smart people and making sure that they get a degree and basically become our future leaders in science and engineering and medicine and whatever. The impact of that is huge, and we won't even know what the impact is until they've are further on in their careers. And
well, that's the important part too about putting your faith into students, right? I mean, I think in any educational institution or even working in an investment firm too, there is that unknown part, but you're investing in students who have showcased their strengths, and I think that in itself speaks a bit, right?
Yeah, and we'll see what the impact is in the long run.
Well, yeah, that's it. That's life.
Yeah.
So let's jump into the question about business. And I want to understand from your perspective, do you believe, let's say, social impact or just social good, do you believe that's an important part of business?
So the funny thing, in Mexico, we helped a student. I had never heard of social enterprises, impact investing, etc. And I just saw there's value created here. And I think, and that's the essence of business. It's you take a certain amount of resources and you create something that's more valuable than the resources you needed beforehand. And so that value creation, the whole standard, the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity thing, that applies in general in business. And it doesn't really matter what, of course there's businesses that don't create value, but there's also a lot of businesses that are not necessarily impact businesses, don't present themselves as impact businesses, like an example, like not an impact business is all. I happen to be hosted by Shopify here today. Like that's not an impact business, but they help so many entrepreneurs, like make it easier for them to start a business. And if you just look at like, these are small time entrepreneurs who like basically improve their lives. So like, it's not an impact business, but it definitely has an impact. So I think like the best businesses are in the end, in a way, impact businesses. Don't necessarily present themselves that way, but have a positive impact. And the other way around is true also. No? Like if you look at a company that doesn't have a positive impact, like who could really be surprised with the whole Volkswagen scandal like a couple of years ago? I mean, you create a product who's what's not aligned with the needs of society. Of course, one way or another, there is going to be friction, and that is going to hurt the business. And you see that with like socially minded like investment funds that don't invest in things like weapons, oil and gas, etc. They've outperformed traditional investment funds for the last 5 years, simply because it's a risk aversion strategy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think creating value and impact, like they all, like it's part of business. It should be part of good businesses, and some businesses have more of it than others.
Yeah, and I mean, what's interesting about that is there's your direct businesses, your direct impact businesses, and your indirect impact businesses, right? I would consider Shopify an indirect impact business because in their mandate, they're there to still assist people and still help people, but they're also building a future generation of entrepreneurs. And I think that's an incredibly impactful way. It's just a very indirect way, right? They're not openly as Shopify. We are an impact business, but they are still doing it. And then I mean, you have much more obvious ones. Like an example is Patagonia. Right? Patagonia is a completely obvious social enterprise, but the part I agree with you the most about is that a business has to have an impact measurement or at least an impact mission built into it. If you don't, you won't survive. You might survive a while. You might find loopholes. You might be able to beat the system a little bit, but you won't survive in the long run, right? An impact business benefits society or the environment or some way that humans have to survive, right? And that will always survive.
Yeah, you have to create value, and otherwise you're going to run into some sort of scandal or problem or barrier at some point.
Well, not even scandal. You just people see through that eventually, right? You can convince people for a very long time that you're an impactful company, but the second that people start to realize that, it falls apart, right? And I mean, we've seen that. We've seen traditional businesses that fall apart within, a very short time frame of a couple of years that existed for hundreds or existed for 100 years, right? And it's because people eventually now, in a modern age of social media, see through kind of the guys that you have, right?
Yeah, and they may have been creating value for 90 of those 100 years as well, no? Like society changes, which means that it changes what is value. So that's also true.
Yeah, that's awesome. So last question. Do you mind if we jump into it?
Nope.
Let's do it. Okay. The last question is your advice. And I mean, we've talked about investments. We've talked about investing in, future students, impact businesses, non-impact businesses, encapsulating all that. What's your advice for other people to begin making a positive impact in their communities?
Yeah, well, a very hard question.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, it can be a little bit tough. That's why I like it.
And also, like, am I an authority? Can I give that kind of advice? I haven't even figured it out for myself.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a part of it, right? I mean, I'm still learning too. I absolutely.
Yeah. I think, like, do you mean as like starting a business, or in general? I think like when you just see a problem and you think you have a solution or you have what it takes to figure out a solution, which is probably more likely, then go for it. You probably can figure out a solution and do something at some scale. It's always the question, like, to what extent it's scalable and how large of it's ever going to be. I like, to be honest, like I'm still figuring that out myself. How can I always feel like advising people, man.
No, and I mean, maybe the question or the statement of advice is a little bit cumbersome sometimes, because even for me, it's a little bit difficult when you're still figuring out what that means. But I mean, the one thing that you said, which is kind of a universal statement, is just go for it, right? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? As long as you go from a risk aversion mindset, like you're talking about, the worst that can happen is you fail. I mean, what really is a failure? Well, I mean, it's an opportunity to try something different, right? Pivot, change it a little bit, do something different, but keep your core morals. And there you go, right? Eventually, just by process of elimination, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, but that does require that you constantly keep an open mind to what is actually happening. Like like good intentions don't always result in good outcomes.
That's true.
Like one of the frustrations I find in my day-to-day life is that there's definitely an image out there of Africa that it's just kind of like a whole continent full of problems. Like I have literally had investors asking me, like, what do they need engineers for? Don't they need food? You know? And that's definitely true for certain places in Africa.
Very one-shaded.
But also, yes, and very not true for the majority of the continent. Like there are very successful businesses in Africa that are doing amazing things, and they need engineers, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So we should educate them. And I think like a reason that that image persists of Africa is by some people who, with very good intentions, run non-profits who depend on donations, and donations for them depend on keeping that image of Africa intact through posters in every bus stop of a child with a hunger belly.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, in the long run, with the best intentions, they do more harm than good to the continent. So maybe that's not so much an advice, but a request to always keep an open mind to not only like what your intentions are, but also what is actually happening with what you're doing, and be okay with accepting that maybe the outcome wasn't what you intended, and pivot if needed, and don't just keep your head down and keep going no matter what. So I don't think that's advice, but more like a friendly request.
Yeah, I think there's advice in there too. Still, there is. Yeah. I mean, if I can encapsulate it, it really is always try, but always try it with an open mind.
Yeah.
And I mean that's not just business. That's in any aspect of life. You have to keep an open mind. And I like to think of open-mindedness as kind of being adaptive. Right? You're adapted to every situation, but also adaptive to, you might have seen something your entire life and it might be, a preset for you, but that's not always true. Right?
Yeah.
Not always true.
Yeah. And those are very hard, like.
Oh yeah. They're ingrained in you. Yeah. It can be difficult to get rid of those. Those are things that mold your character. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's always difficult.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thijs, I just wanted to say, a last statement of just saying thank you. And I want to say thank you for, taking time today for giving advice and also giving a little bit of a request, which I love. And just, being with me here today to talk about social impact around the world.
Very welcome. Thank you very much for talking to me today.